It's got a showy bloom, strawberries, apples, peaches, blackberries. Insects are what we need for pollination of those blooms. If you've got a crop that has a non-showy bloom, like grapevines or nut trees, wind pollination is the way the job gets done. Insects play relatively little role in pollination in grapes. So what is pollination? In essence, it's nothing but moving that pollen grain from one part of the flower to another. Moving the pollen from the anther to the stigmatic surface. Once that pollen grain is there, pollination is over. That's it. But what happens after that in some crops is that pollen grain will germinate and grow down the style and fertilize the ovary, and now we've got a fruit. It's not that easy. Life is complicated, okay? Some fruits are self-fertile. All the peach varieties we grow, basically all the blackberry varieties, strawberries, are self-fertile. You can have one variety, and as far as that plant's going, it'll set a crop of fruit because they don't need to be cross-pollinated. However, if you're growing apples or pears, some types of blueberries, you should consider that you need a minimum of 2 varieties of that same type of fruit to get cross-pollination, because the pollen from the same flower cannot fertilize that bloom. It won't set. And so we have to have pollen blown in or carried in by insects from another tree or another variety that blooms at the same time before this bloom will be fertilized. So it's important to know, if you're putting out a crop, do you need to have more than one plant of that variety? And if your neighbor's close by and they've got apple trees, you probably are going to get benefit of their trees as far as cross-pollination. But if they don't, you may need to have 2 or 3 varieties of your own. Okay? One thing that I run into a lot is how much room do you need to devote to growing fruit crops to give you as much of that fruit as you want. And so the next few slides, which are in the handout, hopefully will give you a guide. Now, what I've done is indicated how far apart in the row we space our plants, how far apart are the rows spaced, and then the size of the plant that we might get as a result. So on matted row strawberries, we generally plant our plants anywhere from 18 to 24 inches apart, depending on how much the variety will run. And then our rows will be about 4 feet apart. And if we plant in the spring and pull the blooms on those plants, we'll get enough runner production to fill up the row and have a nice solid stand to go into the next spring. If we're going with annual production, and commercially we've gone into plasticulture or annual strawberry production a lot. Instead of planting in the spring, we're planting in the fall of the year. We're cropping them in the spring and destroying them. And so we don't want runner production. We plant the plants closer together. So we'll build a raised bed, put 2 rows of plants on the raised bed that are about 12 inches apart, and crop them in the spring and tear it up. So this will give you an idea, though, about how much spacing we use. And then the next slide, how long does it take to get your first crop? How long to get a full crop? How long should that plant live and produce that crop? And how much production is realistic from that plant? So if you're growing rabbit-eye blueberries, from the time you plant to the time you get your first crop, I'd like to see 2 to 3 years elapse. It'll be 6 to 8 years of good growth before you're in full production, but those blueberry plants can easily live 24 or 25, 30 years or more if we keep the soil pH down around 5. Each plant at maturity can produce 15 to 20 pounds of fruit. So, hopefully that'll give you an idea of about how many plants you need to have. And so on for all the small fruits. And then oops. I have the same thing for tree fruits, and I thought it was in there, and maybe it is just yeah. Tree fruits are out of, this is out of order, but anyhow, same thing for tree fruits. What kind of spacing do you want? How big is that plant going to get? And notice now, down in the apples with dwarf trees, we're putting them really close together. And both within the row and the rows are closer together, and we're growing a smaller plant. The idea being that it's a lot easier to take care of and more consistent in the quality. And then again, how many years till the first crop, full crop? How long will the plants live in fruit, and what's your yield expectations? And I put this down because I've been several times, I'll visit somebody that's planted a new orchard and ask them, what are you going to do with your fruit? And they've said, we're going to use it ourselves. It's for us. And they've planted 20 apple trees. I said, what are you going to do with 200 bushel apples in about 8-10 years? And they said, well, I hadn't thought of that. Because didn't know, it's hard to imagine that little bitty tree kicking out 8 to 10 bushel apples, but that's what will happen. So hopefully this will be a little bit of a guide. I want to back up to this slide. One of the things, especially in commercial fruit production, I like to talk about site selection. Site selection is the most important decision that you as a fruit grower will ever make, because everything that happens to that crop in production and in marketing will be impacted, at least to an extent, by your selection of site. And I write the wildlife control recommendations for the Southeast. And so I was in Missouri and Arkansas doing a bunch of in the vineyard meetings on wildlife control. We ran deer out of every vineyard we went to. But we got to this place, and I was standing in a vineyard looking down the hill at this vineyard. The only thing that could have made this a worse site would be if it was underwater, okay? This person violated every rule in the book except that one. And I took this slide about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Look at how much of this small planting is shaded. In the morning, the shade comes from this side. So it's terrible. High, fairly dense growth all around. It's a frost pocket. It's a disease pocket. This is good habitat for wildlife. And 8 years into the vineyard's life, they'd never harvested a crop. So they violated everything. We want full sun, we want elevation, we want the soils that are right so that we can stand a chance of getting a crop. And that, as much as possible, goes for the home orchardist as well as commercial. There's an old saying that I really like. Live where you farm, don't farm where you live. And I'll go into a place and the person says, I want to plant an orchard down there. And so, why do you want to plant there? Well, I own that land. Said, no, sell it. Get rid of it. Go buy something that's worthwhile. Don't start off on a venture that costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time with 2 strikes against you. Get the best possible site. Now, I'm not saying if you're a homeowner, move. That's not realistic. But if you want to grow fruit commercially, it is realistic, okay? Harvest periods, this will give you a guide as to when we're picking most of our fruit crops, okay? And what we're starting to see now is that some of our fruits are breaking the old timing, like blackberry. Now, most of the blackberries that we grow, we'll pick anywhere from mid-June on up through the month of July. There are now several varieties of blackberries that will start to fruit in August and will fruit to frost. So if you want to have ripe blackberries at your place until frost, we can do it. And things are changing. Some of the apple varieties that we're growing now are ripening even later than before. Pink Lady and Gold Rush, we're picking in November. And they're wonderful apples. So, you know, look at this and see, you know, you can't take your trip to the beach in the middle of peach harvest, right? So you might need to go either earlier or later if you want to do that. Or in the case of the last couple of years, it doesn't make any difference because we lost the crop. But hopefully that's not going to happen this year. Okay. When to harvest, some fruit will continue to ripen after they're harvested, after they're off the plant, if they're mature at the time we pick them. Apples are one of those, apricot, pear, peach, and plum are others. So if they're mature, and mature just means that they're capable of ripening at the time you pick, they'll go ahead and ripen. Now they won't be as good as if you let them ripen fully on the tree though. Other fruit like blueberry, cherry, grape, strawberry, and the nut crops, the stage of ripeness they're at when you pick them off the plant is as far as they're going to go. The next thing is rotting. Okay, they're not going to get better. So know that, because if you want to pick an apple and you want to hold it for a while, you don't want to let it get tree ripe. You want to pick it where it's mature but not ripe. It'll last a lot longer. But if you're picking your blueberries, be aware that they're ready to be eaten right away and they're not going to last a long time.